Tonight we drift far from the cosy mountain halls of Olympus and glide instead toward the crash of ocean waves, the hush of a temple, and the whisper of fate unravelling. This is the story of a girl, a mortal girl, who was beautiful. Too beautiful, they said. Her name was Medusa, not a monster. Not yet. Not until the gods took from her, in the worst ways possible. Before we begin, please comment where you are and what time it is so we can see who's joining us from around the world. It's fascinating to discover where you are tuning in from. Now close your eyes, sink into the covers, take a deep breath and release it, relaxing your face, shoulders, and the rest of your body. Let your thoughts slow, and remember that this story is thankfully a myth, a product of ancient storytelling that has changed over time, and not a historical record of an actual event or person. Medusa was born in a coastal village where the sea met the cliffs, the youngest of 3 sisters. The Gorgon sisters, they were called, though back then the name held no terror, only pride. Their family had served as guardians of sacred knowledge for generations, keeping ancient scrolls and traditions safe in their seaside home. Stheno, the eldest, was fierce and proud, with a laugh that could be heard over stormy waves. Euryale, the middle sister, was clever with numbers and maps, able to chart the stars and tides with uncanny accuracy. And then there was Medusa, quiet, observant, with a gift for seeing what others missed. Their mother had been a priestess before them, though not of Athena's order. She served the old sea goddesses, the ones whose names were whispered in shells and sung by tide pools. She taught her daughters the secret languages of the ocean, how to read the patterns in sea foam, how to hear messages in wave crashes, how to find meaning in the spiral of a nautilus shell. But Medusa's path diverged from her sisters when she was 12, during the festival of Athena. When the goddess's travelling priests came to their village, something extraordinary happened. As the sacred owls were released into the evening sky, one broke from its trained flight path and landed directly on young Medusa's shoulder. It stayed there throughout the ceremony, its amber eyes fixed on the horizon, while the priests whispered among themselves about signs and portents. The high priestess of the travelling temple, a woman with eyes like polished silver, approached Medusa's family that night. "The goddess has chosen," she said simply, and that was that. Choice, the choice, in matters of divine calling, was often more of a formality than a reality. Her sisters wept when she left, braiding protective charms into her hair the night before her departure. Stheno gave her a small knife of blessed bronze, telling her to keep it always close. Euryale pressed into her hands a collection of seashells, each one marked with tiny symbols of protection and remembrance. Their mother said nothing, but wrapped her in a shawl woven with patterns so ancient even she didn't know their full meaning. The journey to Athena's great temple took 7 days. Medusa watched her homeland disappear behind her, the familiar crash of waves fading into memory. She clutched her small bag of belongings, the knife, the shells, a lock of each sister's hair woven into a bracelet, and tried not to let fear show on her face. The temple that would become her home rose from the earth like a dream carved in marble. Its columns reached toward the sky like fingers grasping for divine wisdom, its steps worn smooth by centuries of supplicants' feet. Here she learned new languages, the whisper of olive leaves, the rhythm of sacred chants, the silent speech of stone and shadow. Year by year she transformed from the wide-eyed girl of that coastal village into Athena's priestess. She learned to read omens in the flight of owls, to mix sacred oils, to tend eternal flames that must never die. Her natural grace became refined into ritual movement, her quiet observation transformed into deep wisdom. But she never forgot the sea. On quiet nights she would hold her sister's shells to her ear, listening to the echo of waves from home, whispering prayers in that old language of tide and foam. Sometimes she swore she could hear them whispering back, warning her of something she couldn't quite understand. The marble floors of Athena's temple caught the morning light like captured moonbeams, each polished tile a mirror for the sacred flames that never died. Through these halls walked Medusa, her bare feet silent against the cool stone, her movements a dance learned through years of devotion. The hem of her white robe whispered secrets to the floor as she moved. Dawn was her favourite time in the temple. Before the supplicants came with their prayers and offerings, before her fellow priestesses began their daily rituals, there was this. Just her, the goddess's presence, and the kind of silence that felt like a held breath. She knelt before the great statue of Athena, her dark hair falling like spilled ink around her shoulders. It was her pride, that hair, though she would never admit to such vanity. Each morning she would weave it into complex braids, each pattern a prayer, each twist an offering to the goddess of wisdom. The other priestesses often asked to help, just to run their fingers through those midnight strands that seemed to capture and hold shadows. But it wasn't just her hair that drew attention. Her eyes held a depth that made people forget their words mid-sentence. They were the colour of the sea before a storm, grey-green and full of secrets. More than one visitor to the temple had stumbled in their prayers upon meeting her gaze, earning them gentle reminders that their devotions should be directed toward the goddess, not her servant. Medusa lifted the sacred oil, her movements precise from years of practice. The scent of olives and herbs filled the air as she anointed the base of Athena's statue. Her lips moved in silent prayer, words she had spoken so many times they had become part of her heartbeat. Wise one, sharp-eyed one, accept this offering from your humble servant. The morning light streamed through the high windows, creating patterns on the floor that seemed to move with divine purpose. Medusa had learned to read these patterns, to see in them the goddess's subtle messages. Today they seemed restless, shifting more quickly than usual, but she attributed it to clouds passing overhead. If she had known how to read omens better, she might have seen it as a warning. But who expects disaster in a sacred place? Who looks for shadows in a temple of light? She rose from her prayers, gathering her ceremonial implements. The day's first supplicants would arrive soon, and there were preparations to make. As she moved through the temple's inner chambers, she passed a polished bronze mirror and caught a glimpse of herself. Young, beautiful, devoted. Later she would remember this moment and wonder if she had imagined a flicker of something else in her reflection. Perhaps a shadow. Perhaps a warning. Perhaps fate itself turning its heavy gaze toward her. But for now she was simply Medusa, priestess of Athena, keeper of sacred flames, tender of holy grounds. Beautiful, yes, but beauty was not her purpose. Her purpose was service, devotion, the preservation of wisdom's light. The temple bells began their morning song, calling the faithful to worship. Medusa straightened her robes, checked that her hair was properly arranged, and turned toward the temple doors. Another day of service to the goddess was beginning. She had no way of knowing it would be her last. The day began like any other, but there was something different in the air, a heaviness, like the pressure before a storm. The temple fires burned with unusual intensity, and the sacred owls were restless in their roosts, shifting and clicking their beaks at shadows. Medusa noticed these signs, but years of training had taught her to maintain composure. She went about her morning duties, cleaning the altar, arranging fresh offerings, sweeping the marble steps. Her hair was bound in ritual braids, each one representing a prayer to Athena. The silver bands around her wrists, markers of her vows, caught the light as she moved. It was during the quiet hour when the sun hung directly overhead and most supplicants had gone to take their midday meal that she felt it. a change in the air, a shift in the temple's atmosphere that made the tiny hairs on her arms rise. The sacred flame flickered, though there was no breeze. Then came the smell of sea spray. Not the gentle mist she remembered from home, but something wilder, darker. Salt mixed with power and something else. Something hungry. He didn't enter through the door. Poseidon simply was there, filling the temple with his presence. He smelled of storm surge and shipwrecks, of depths where light never reached. His form shifted like water, one moment appearing as a mighty warrior, the next as the very essence of the sea itself. Medusa immediately prostrated herself, as protocol demanded when in the presence of a god. But even as she pressed her forehead to the cool marble floor, she felt wrong. This wasn't right. This was Athena's temple. The sea god had no business here. Rise, little priestess. His voice crashed like waves against rocks. Let me look at you. She rose, keeping her eyes downcast as she'd been taught. But she could feel his gaze on her, heavy as an anchor chain. They speak of your beauty even on Olympus, he said, moving closer. They say your hair rivals the night itself, that your eyes hold secrets even the gods might envy. Medusa backed away one step, then another. My lord, she managed, her voice barely a whisper. This is Athena's temple. I am her sworn priestess. I cannot. The word rumbled like distant thunder. Since when do mortals tell gods what they cannot do? What happened next was violence wrapped in divine power. The temple's sacred flames went out. The marble floors trembled. Medusa screamed, once, before his hand covered her mouth. She reached for Stheno's bronze knife hidden in the folds of her robe. But what use was mortal bronze against a god? Above them, Athena's statue stood silent witness as Poseidon took what he wanted. The god of the sea, who could shake the earth and raise tsunamis, who could have had willing lovers in any coastal town, chose instead to demonstrate his power here in his rival's temple upon her sworn priestess. When it was over, he left as he had come, simply ceasing to be there. The air still crackled with divine energy, but now it felt tainted, wrong. Medusa lay on the marble floor, her ritual robes torn, her carefully braided hair undone, her blood staining the sacred stones. And then, in the awful silence that followed, she felt another presence, colder than the sea, sharper than steel. Athena had come. Athena's arrival wasn't heralded by thunder or spectacle. The air simply crystallized, becoming sharp as owl talons, clear as mountain streams. The goddess materialized beside her fallen statue, her grey eyes taking in the scene with the cold calculation of a general surveying a battlefield. Medusa tried to stand to show proper respect, but her limbs betrayed her. She managed only to raise herself to her knees, her torn robes clutched around her like broken shields. Blood, both divine and mortal, still stained the marble floor, and the remnants of Poseidon's power hung in the air like sea mist. My goddess, Medusa whispered, her voice raw. I tried to stop him. I tried dash. Silence. That single word froze the very air. Athena moved forward, her form shifting between warrior and scholar, between owl and woman, between justice and vengeance. Her aegis, the mighty shield bearing Medusa's own face. Oh, the irony that would become, gleamed with reflected light that seemed to judge everything it touched. You have allowed my temple to be desecrated. Athena's voice held no emotion, which somehow made it worse. My sacred ground defiled. My priestess corrupted. But I didn't, Medusa began, then stopped as the goddess raised her hand. The facts are these, Athena continued, pacing in a circle around her kneeling priestess. My uncle took what he wanted, as is his way. He violated my territory, as is his nature. But you... She paused, looking down at Medusa. You were the vessel through which this desecration occurred. Please, Medusa whispered, but prayer seemed pointless now. She could feel divine judgment settling around her like a noose. Your beauty drew his attention, your form tempted his desire. Even now your blood mingles with his essence on my temple floor. Athena's voice grew colder with each word. This cannot be undone, but it can be transformed. The goddess reached down and lifted Medusa's chin with one finger, forcing her to meet that steel-grey gaze. You were praised for your beauty. Let it become terror. Your hair, that men so admired, let it writhe with serpent's life. Those eyes that drew such attention, let them turn all who meet their gaze to stone. The transformation began at Medusa's scalp, each strand of her famous hair writhing, splitting, becoming living serpents. The pain was beyond mortal comprehension. Every nerve ending screaming as divine punishment rewrote her very being. Her skin hardened, taking on a scaled sheen in places. Her teeth sharpened, her tongue split, and her eyes burned with a power that would turn living flesh to stone. Rise, Athena commanded. Rise and leave this place. You are no longer my priestess. You are my warning, a reminder of what happens when mortals become the focus of divine attention. Medusa stumbled to her feet, her new form strange and horrible. The serpents that were now her hair hissed and writhed, tasting the air, sensing her fear. When she looked at the mirror-bright shield of Athena, she saw a monster gazing back. Go, Athena's voice held finality. Go to the ends of the earth. Let none look upon you and live. Let your curse be both punishment and protection, for who can harm what they cannot safely see? Medusa fled the temple as the sun set, her bare feet bleeding on the marble steps she had so carefully swept that morning. The serpents of her hair writhed in agitation, their hissing a chorus of confusion and fear. She kept her eyes tightly shut. She had already seen what happened when she accidentally glanced at a dove during her transformation. The small statue that was once a living bird now lay in the temple courtyard, a permanent reminder of her curse. She ran through the gathering darkness, past olive groves and sleeping villages. Every sound made her flinch. A dog's bark, a child's distant laughter, the call of night birds. The world that had once been her home was now a landscape of potential victims. She couldn't risk being seen, couldn't risk meeting anyone's gaze. The first night was the hardest. She took shelter in a cave, her priestess robes now tattered and stained. The serpents in her hair moved restlessly, and she realized with horror that she could feel what they felt. Their hunger, their confusion, their strange, alien thoughts merging with her own. Worse, she could sense their desire to strike at anything that moved. In the cave's damp darkness, Medusa finally allowed herself to weep. But even her tears had changed. They fell as drops of venom that sizzled against the stone floor. Each sob echoed back to her, transformed by the cave into something that sounded less human with each reflection. She reached for her sister's seashell, still miraculously in the pocket of her ruined robes. But when she held them to her ear, instead of the comforting sound of waves, she heard only screams. The protective charms her sisters had woven seemed to shrivel in the presence of her curse. Dawn brought new challenges. She needed to move, to find somewhere far from people, but daylight meant witnesses. She tore strips from her robes to create a crude veil, hoping to hide the worst of her transformation. The serpents protested, pressing against the fabric until it writhed like a living thing. She began moving only at night, following the stars she'd once studied as a priestess. Each step took her further from civilization, from the life she had known. She learned to hunt by sound and smell, her new senses growing sharper as her humanity receded. The serpents proved useful for this at least. They could sense warm bodies nearby, could tell her which direction to avoid. Animals fled from her presence. Plants withered when she passed too close. The very earth seemed to reject her cursed form, but still she pressed on, driven by the need to find somewhere, anywhere, that she could exist without bringing destruction. After weeks of travel, she reached the edges of the known world. Here, where maps showed only monsters and mysteries, she found a place that seemed designed for creatures like her, a maze of rocky caves near the ocean, far from any human settlement. The constant crash of waves reminded her, though the sound now seemed to mock her exile. The cave she chose was deep and complex, with many chambers. In time she would learn every turn and crevice by touch alone, never needing to risk opening her eyes. She began to create a sort of home there, though home seemed too gentle a word for a monster's lair. But the worst part wasn't the solitude, or the darkness, or even the physical changes. It was knowing that her story would be told wrong. She could already imagine how they would speak of her, not as a victim of divine injustice, but as a monster who had somehow deserved her fate. In her cave by the edge of the world, Medusa learned to become something new. The transformation wasn't just physical. It was a complete reshaping of how she existed in the world. Her former priestess's discipline helped her establish new rituals, new ways of surviving. She learned to listen to her serpentine hair, discovering that each snake had its own personality, its own way of warning her of approaching dangers. The one that curled above her left ear was particularly alert, while two intertwined serpents at the nape of her neck seemed more interested in hunting than warning. She began to think of them as companions rather than a curse. They were, after all, the only beings that couldn't be turned to stone by her gaze. Her other senses heightened to compensate for her mostly closed eyes. She could taste approaching storms on the air hours before they arrived. The vibrations of footsteps through stone told her when creatures, or people, ventured too close to her domain. Even her skin became more sensitive, able to feel changes in air pressure that warned of approaching visitors. The cave itself she transformed into a strange sort of sanctuary. In the main chamber she created a garden of statues, not by choice, but as a result of unfortunate encounters with those who sought her out. Adventurers, warriors, lost travellers, each became an eternal testament to human curiosity and hubris. She tried to position them in ways that preserved some dignity, arranging them like artworks in a temple gallery. Sometimes, in the deeper darkness of night, she would talk to them, apologizing, explaining, sharing her loneliness with those who could no longer flee from it. Deeper in the cave system, she created her actual living space. Here she kept the few possessions she still valued, her sister's seashells, now stored in a natural stone alcove, Steno's bronze knife, useless against gods but still precious, and scraps of her priestess robes, carefully preserved as a reminder of who she had been. She developed methods for obtaining necessities. The serpents could hunt small prey, though she discovered that her curse affected animals as well as humans. She learned to fish by touch in tidal pools, her hands becoming sensitive enough to catch slippery creatures in complete darkness. The local flora, while sparse, included some edible plants that hadn't existed in her temple gardens, hardy, bitter things that seemed to match her new existence. But perhaps the strangest adaptation was to her own power. She discovered that her gaze didn't simply turn things to stone, it preserved them perfectly in the moment of transformation. Flowers remained as fresh as the instant they changed, their petals eternally caught between bloom and wither. This led to an odd sort of art, carefully controlled glimpses that created permanent beauty from temporary things. She began to understand why Athena had chosen this particular curse. It was isolation wrapped in power, loneliness disguised as strength, the ability to prevent anyone from ever hurting her again, but at the cost of never being able to look upon another living face. Protection and punishment, wrapped in the same divine gift. Years passed this way, marked only by the changing seasons and the slow accumulation of statues in her outer chamber. She developed a routine, a way of existing that, while not happy, was at least sustainable. The serpents grew more attuned to her moods, sometimes coiling softly around her shoulders when the loneliness became too heavy to bear alone. But the world had not forgotten her. Stories spread, growing wilder with each telling. She became a cautionary tale, a monster to frighten children, a challenge for heroes to prove themselves against. And eventually, these stories would bring Perseus to her door. That morning, Medusa woke to her serpent's agitation. They writhed and hissed in unusual patterns, tasting something foreign on the air, divine energy, but different from what she remembered. Not the overwhelming power of Poseidon or the cold precision of Athena. This was something diluted, mixed with mortality, a demigod. Perseus came equipped with a god's favour, carrying their gifts like a merchant's pack of wares. Medusa could sense them all: Athena's polished shield, Hades' helm of darkness, Hermes' winged sandals, Zeus's adamantine sword. The gods had armed their champion well, a mortal carrying immortal weapons come to slay the monster. She laughed then, a sound that echoed through her cave like breaking glass. The serpents echoed her bitter amusement with soft hisses. How fitting that the gods would send someone else to finish what they had started. They wouldn't even do their own killing. From her years of solitude, Medusa had developed an acute awareness of her cave's acoustics. She could track Perseus's movement by the whisper of his sandals on stone, the subtle shift of air as he moved invisibly through her gallery of statues. She heard his sharp intake of breath as he passed her collection of victims, warriors, adventurers, lost travellers, all frozen in their final moments of realization. "Come to add yourself to my collection, godling," she called out, her voice rough from disuse. The acoustics carried her words throughout the cave, making it impossible for Perseus to tell where she was. "Your divine parents sent you well equipped, I see. Did they tell you the whole story, I wonder? Or just the parts that made me a monster?" She moved silently through the passages she knew by heart, while Perseus stumbled in the dark despite his divine gifts. The serpents guided her, their sensory input allowing her to track the demigod's position perfectly. "Did Athena tell you I was her priestess?" Medusa continued, circling around behind him. "Did she mention how Poseidon came to her temple? How he—" Her voice caught, centuries-old pain still fresh. "No, I suspect they left that part out. Easier to make me a monster than admit their own crimes." She could hear Perseus's breathing quicken, could sense him turning, trying to locate her voice as it bounced off the cave walls. He held the mirrored shield before him. Clever boy, but not clever enough. She had lived in darkness for centuries. She didn't need eyes to hunt. "I was beautiful once," she said, moving closer. "They said my hair was like spun night, my eyes like stars. Funny how the gods punish in ironies, isn't it? Now my hair is alive and my eyes bring death. Tell me, hero, do you think that's justice?" "I don't want to kill you," Perseus called out, his voice betraying his youth. He couldn't have been more than 18, another child sent to do the gods' dirty work. "I have to bring your head to King Polydectes." It's the only way to save my mother." Medusa's laugh echoed again, harder this time. "Ah, so they've manipulated you too. Always the same with the gods. They create impossible situations, then stand back to watch mortals dance." The serpents of her hair writhed in agitation, sensing her rising anger. "Let me guess. Athena came to you in a dream, offered you her guidance, her shield, her divine wisdom." She circled closer, silent as death. Perseus was good. His demigod reflexes kept him moving, kept him from becoming an easy target. But she had been playing this deadly game far longer than he had been alive. "Your mother," she said, softening her voice. "They always use our mothers, don't they? Our sisters, our loved ones. They find our weaknesses and twist them into nooses." She was close enough now to see his reflection in the polished shield he held. So young, so determined, so certain he was doing the right thing. "I had a mother too," Medusa continued. "Sisters, a life, a purpose. I served in Athena's temple, kept her sacred flames burning, sang her hymns at dawn." Her voice cracked slightly. "I was devoted, faithful, and when Poseidon came, when he—" She broke off, the serpents hissing in shared pain at the memory. "When he took what he wanted, do you know what Athena did? She blamed me, cursed me, made me this." Perseus's grip on his shield wavered slightly. "The stories don't tell it that way," he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. "Of course they don't," Medusa replied, bitterness dripping from every word. "History belongs to the winners, hero, to the gods, to men with swords who call themselves champions of justice." She was directly behind him now. One glance would end it all. But something made her hesitate. Perhaps a remnant of the priestess she had been. Perhaps simple weariness with the endless cycle of violence. "You could leave," she offered suddenly. "Tell them you couldn't find me. Tell them I was already dead. Surely there is another way to save your mother that doesn't require more blood, more death." For a moment, one breathless, hopeful moment, she thought he might agree. His shield lowered slightly, his posture shifted. Then an owl's cry pierced the cave's silence, Athena's signal. What happened next was a blur of motion and divine intervention. Perseus swung around, guided by his goddess's hand. The mirrored shield caught Medusa's reflection at the perfect angle. The adamantine sword, forged by Zeus himself, arced through the air. In that last instant, as the divine blade whistled through the air, Medusa saw her own reflection in Perseus's shield. She looked nothing like the monster of legend. Her face, despite its serpentine crown, still held traces of the priestess she had been. The same high cheekbones, the same full lips that had once sung hymns to Athena. Her eyes, those deadly weapons, were filled not with malice, but with an ancient sadness. The sword struck true. The gods made sure of that. The blade, sharp enough to cut through fate itself, separated head from body in one clean stroke. But death, when it came, was not the end. From the wound erupted two beings. Pegasus, the winged horse, burst forth with wings of pure white, his coat gleaming like sea foam in sunlight. Behind him emerged Chrysaor, the warrior with a golden sword, born fully grown and armoured. Life from death, beauty from horror, Poseidon's divine blood mixing with Medusa's mortal essence in one final act of creation. As her consciousness faded, Medusa felt a strange sense of triumph. Even in death, she had created something the gods hadn't expected. Not monsters, but wonders. Her last thought was of her sisters, and she hoped they would know she'd never stopped fighting. Perseus stood in the aftermath, holding her severed head, watching in awe as her children took flight and fled the cave. The serpents of her hair continued to writhe, somehow still alive, still deadly. Blood dripped onto the cave floor, not red mortal blood, but a mixture of gold and silver, divine and human essence intermingled. The statues remained silent witnesses to her final moments. Some said that in the years that followed, on particularly quiet nights, the stone figures would weep, tears of salt water that smelled of the sea. Perseus wrapped the head in cloth blessed by Athena, but even dead, Medusa's power remained. Through his journey home, the head continued to transform things to stone. Branches that brushed against the bundle, curious animals that came too close, one unfortunate bandit who tried to steal what he thought was mere treasure. But the true aftermath was larger than Perseus, larger even than the gods who'd orchestrated this end. Medusa's story refused to die. It whispered through generations, changing shape like her serpent hair, taking on new meanings as time passed. Her head became a weapon, wielded by Perseus and later mounted on Athena's shield, the goddess claiming in death what she had cursed in life. But it also became a symbol of protection, carved over doorways and painted on shields, its power transformed from curse to blessing. Pegasus, her son, would go on to become a symbol of poetry and inspiration, carrying heroes and bearing divine messages. Chrysia would father a line of kings. Her children's stories would be told without shame, without mention of their mother's suffering, and in the cave by the sea where it all ended, they say the stones still remember. On storm-dark nights, when the waves crash against the cliffs and the wind howls like divine laughter, visitors swear they can hear a voice, not monstrous but clear and strong, still asking its eternal question. Who is the real monster in this story? Well, friends, I think we can all agree it's definitely not Medusa. So sleep now, knowing this. Some monsters are made, some heroes are thieves, and sometimes the truth isn't at all what you thought.